Am I saying that you should become an off ramp for everyone no matter what? Of course not. We can't all be off ramps for everybody. When people find themselves in troubling, I want to say troubling belief systems or ideologies, yes, they will need support moving out of them when they're ready, if they ever are ready, because being involved in a troubling ideology is a social injury. And the healing is also social. It's to be welcomed into a different social group with a different viewpoint, maybe a more holistic viewpoint, a more grounded viewpoint, a more empathic viewpoint. That is where I'm going with the off ramp projects, is to pretty much say everybody has had terrible ideas. Everybody has bought into things that were silly, whether it's buying a certain kind of car and realizing, oops, it's too expensive to fix, or it's kind of a lemon, or buying into a kind of health approach that turns out to be silly, or buying into a religious approach that doesn't fit after a while. That point where you realize, this might not be for me, is like a turning point where social welcome into another idea can smooth the path for you, so you don't have to just sit there going, I spent a lot on this car and I don't want anyone to know that I'm not intelligent. I'm like, of course you're intelligent. It has nothing to do with that car. You made a decision and the car didn't live up to it, and now you move on, right? But the idea that we can be off ramps for everybody, I think, is silly. And it puts too much pressure on individuals, when a lot of times what we're looking at that people need to take an off ramp from is an entire structure of thought and belief and social control that one person can't affect. However, I think the one thing we can do is just try as hard as we can. Sometimes it's much harder than others, to leave the door open, to say, I'm having difficulty engaging with you because of these ideas. I I find them to be so troubling. And I think they're some of the worst ideas that humans have ever had. So I just want you to know that I'm not like an open ear for these ideas, but I am an open heart for you as an individual who has taken up these ideas for whatever reason, right? Is not killing the relationship because of the ideas, or ending all social engagement because of the ideas. Now, sometimes you're going to need to, right? If your ideas about me, let's say that I am gay, and your ideas are that I got to be fixed. I've got to have reparation therapy to force me into something I am not and never will be. I'm going to need to have some separation from you, right? Some of my gay and lesbian friends can engage with people who are that closed off to the realities of gender and sexuality. But for me, I would be more like, get away from me, right? Each of us has a different temperature and tolerance for what we can experience and what we can't. So don't think you have to be an off ramp for everyone. Sometimes you can't even be an off ramp for yourself, because what's going on around you is so difficult to understand and to sort of uptake in your system. Your system goes, nope, that's poison, right? But the thing with me for the off ramp project is that I want to widen my maybe my area of empathy. I want to widen my area of tolerance of difference. And that's very hard to do in an extremely polarized time like this one. Um, I have I have friends who are conservative who cannot even believe that liberals are a thing. Like they can't even understand how liberals believe what they believe. And I get that because I also have friends who are liberals who can't believe that conservatives are even a thing. You know, that how is that even a thing? How can you watch what's happening and be okay with it? This is not okay, right? And so for people who are in that kind of polarization, they're not going to be off ramps for each other. They're just mostly going to be irritations in each other's, they'll be the mote in each other's eyes. So I think it's important to continually challenge that kind of polarization that says every single person who's a conservative is not my friend and they don't make sense and they can't possibly. It's why I talk so much about braver angels here in the United States, because they are addressing the extreme vulnerabilities we've all been manipulated into that allows us to be separated as a people. And Braver Angels brings blue and red Americans together to talk about important things in such a way. They do a lot of detoxifying of the people so that they're not coming at it like this, like why I oughta, but let's talk about the thing that we're interested in. Let's not tear each other apart, right? And as I've said before, the sort of foundation of Braver Angels is built on a foundation of family therapy, where we see that families are so close and so involved in each other's lives that sometimes they go over the top with their animosity and their unwillingness to listen. And so family therapy helps people get together and say, what is important? Not let's score points off of each other, but what is important? And let's turn ourselves toward that instead of toward each other with fighting. So it's been really good to go to Braver Angels, and I'm a member, and I go to the meetings, some of like how to depolarize within, so that you can begin to understand when you're moving into that polarized position. Those guys don't understand anything. So it's a constant, for me, it's a constant process of working, because I find that there are many ideas going around that are just, they feel so toxic to me. They feel so toxic and sort of like, why would anybody, right? When I get there, I know I'm not the off ramp for these people. I'm not the off ramp for this situation. What can I be the off ramp? What am I comfortable with? And I do that. And if I come across something that is so hard to function around, is so hard to even speak of, I know it's time for me to do more study, more research, more seeking out information. That's how I, build myself, kind of gird myself for the moment ahead, because now I've seen a place that I can't go, and I will not be told no, even by my own self, right? I will try to find a way through it. I had a situation in the break between the season 1 and season 2 of the Off Ramp Project that someone I cared about very much wanted to talk to me about ideas that are from white supremacy, and they are from a very troubling aspect of maleness. And the ideas were that multiculturalism is always a failure because people can't manage themselves. They're always going to be violent toward each other. And I know from my own reading and my own studies that monoculturalism is also trouble because people will be violent with each other. You have to find the reasons for violence instead of going larger. The reasons for violence are what are at the foundation. It doesn't matter if there's a monoculture, one type of people, or multicultural, a number of people. The things that make violence more likely are what you want to look at. You don't want to look at the color of the people or how many languages they speak. So I knew that was wrong. But I couldn't be heard. And so I stopped on that one. And then this person went on to an idea that it was very close to the Great Replacement theory, which is that white people are being replaced. Now, this person didn't say white people. They're smart enough to know not to say that to me, but that because white people, I don't know what that even means, because pale ass people are having a lower birth rate because their countries are tending to be more supportive in regard to healthcare and social structure. You will naturally see women conceiving and families conceiving less children, fewer children, because they know they're not going to die in childbirth or early childhood. It's one of the ways you tell that a culture is beginning to mature and grow up and become more supportive is you have good health care, you have reproductive health care, you have social services, um, uh, you have support for families and parents, you have subsidized child care, you have subsidized elder care, right? So the families aren't so burdened by by just trying to see if their kids are going to live until their fifth birthday, right? So it's a good thing when you see falling birth rates. It's a good thing, unless um, you are in end stage capitalism, and I call it that because it's a cancer. In end stage capitalism, there's no such thing as enough. So you're always going to need to have more babies and more people buying more junk in order to keep the engine of capitalism going. There isn't kind of a place in capitalism where it can say, okay, we used to be a city of, or we used to be a town of 500,000. It looks like 300,000 is where it's going. So we have to rethink how we're doing this, right? Instead, it looks like a failure because capitalism is always about we want more people. We want more people buying more cars and more food and more this and more clothes and blah, blah, blah. Um, in a in a more intelligent approach to money and markets, you don't see that kind of press to have everybody have as many children as possible so you have more consumers, right? It's a good thing when birth rates fall. When birth rates go up, then you're going to look and see where the social structure has fallen apart, where the medical care has fallen apart, where the access to reproductive care has fallen apart. That's when you're going to see larger and larger birth rates. So I knew that they were wrong on those two things. And I tried to talk about it, but where that person was coming from was, a part of a white supremacy concept. And I stopped talking because I realized I was making it worse. I wasn't being an off ramp. I was too, I was devastated. And I stayed devastated for quite a while because, um, not just because this person had been going down an unhealthy path, but because it felt like a betrayal to me. This person's very close to me. I've taken care of this person and provided a great deal to make sure this person's life goes well. And it felt like a kick in the head. I was not able to be an off ramp. I didn't kick them back, right? I didn't destroy them. But anything other than absolute agreement with this idea, because it's a very rigid idea from a very rigid group of ideologies, um, felt like betrayal to that person. And I just thought, yeah, this isn't good for anybody. We need to stop talking about this now. Um, and the way that the person experienced me not wanting to talk about it felt to them that I was now, it's so weird, I was now advocating white genocide. And I was like, you do know what the word genocide means, right? It means the intentional murder of entire groups of people. And I never said anything like that. I said it's good that we have lower birth rates. It's a good sign. It's just not good for capitalism. Okay, it's not good for empire, but it's good for everything else. So So I could see by the response to me not agreeing every single way that I could agree that I was seen as an irritant, right? I was seen as kind of a murderous irritant. And that also threw me into despair and depression. Because it was like I was in my cult again and nobody could hear anything besides what the cult leader was telling them. And I really came back to that sense of powerlessness and that it doesn't matter what I do. Now, this person and I are still close, um, and we're trying to work things out. This person's very bright. And I have something I like to call temporal empathy. And it's the kind of empathy if you've raised kids or helped teach someone something and they just are terrible at it at first, or your kids say, I can do it myself, and they try to vacuum and it's a disaster, but you let them vacuum because they need to learn how to vacuum. It's going to be ugly until it kicks in, right? And temporal empathy is like empathy I have for you that is about the future, like when you will know how to vacuum. So I'm holding temporal empathy for this person who has these extremely rigid ideas that don't follow the social science, that don't follow anthropology and history, but they do follow a white supremacist, hyper capitalist, um, hyper patriarchal mindset that is, very, very up in the zeitgeist, in the air now. And I am holding temporal empathy that these ideas will show themselves to be as rigid and as unconnected to a loving picture, an empathic picture of human development. And I'm holding that temporal empathy while essentially this person vacuums into the walls and is missing all the dirt and is just making a lot of noise. That's all that I can do now. I'm not an off ramp for that person. Maybe in the future, I will leave that open, but I'm not an off ramp for that person now. These are ideas that have created unmanageable human suffering since the first time anybody thought of them, and I can't support them. So, should you be an off ramp for everybody? Okay. You go and knock yourself out. There are some places that I can't go, but I know that I can't go, right? And I at least stopped the bloodshed that could have come out of me, right? I was like, we need to stop talking. Knowing that we've all had terrible ideas, we've all fallen for really silly things. And to have temporal empathy for ourselves and know that change is possible, that you can overcome any kind of bad training. I'm a cult survivor. I overcame it, right? You can overcome it. And so holding on to those ideas are ones that have sort of helped me move through this time of, utter despair. So another thing that really helped me is one of the biggest books I have ever read, and it's called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. Sadly, David Graeber died in 2020. He's one of the greatest thinkers that we've ever had, and he died in 2020, just as this book was finished. So if you'd like to look back at really different, really brilliant, really hilarious views of how humanity does everything it does, his work is so wonderful. He also wrote a book about money, about debt, and it's just a wonderful new way, an eye-opening way, a soul-opening way of looking at how we tell ourselves stories about who humans are and how wrong we've been. Something in this book is they use a lot of humor, just really, really saucy humor. about people that we've been taught, are like these great Rousseau, the French philosopher. Here's what they say about him. Um, Rousseau was an ambitious young philosopher. He was at the time engaged in an elaborate project of trying to sleep his way into influence at the French court. So apparently Rousseau was a saucy little minx, not just a philosopher, but he was good at other things too. Um, this this book is a new way to look at how the story of humanity has been told to us and who was telling it. One of the most interesting things is they talk about how a number of philosophers from France came over to America and spoke to the indigenous people at the time, took the ideas from the indigenous people, went back. The entire French Enlightenment is filled with the ideas from these indigenous people, which was then erased, and the ideas of democracy and what eventually became the United States actually came from the indigenous people here, went to France, got whitewashed, then came back. So a lot of the Enlightenment, a lot of the beginning of democracy was from the Native Americans here on American soil. They had these brilliant communities and systems of communication and trade between all the tribes. And sure, they got into fights, but that wasn't their whole gig. Their multiculturalism didn't always end in violence. That's just one option. It's not a certainty. If you'd like to look at a way of approaching humanity and its foibles and its brilliance, then this book, it's so big. And I think if you get a bunch of these, if you got like a case, you could actually build a house out of them because they're bricks. But it's just a wonderful, for me, these guys and everybody they're talking about, and that saucy minx Rousseau, they have become part of my community. So that when I see these death-filled ideas of white supremacy and end stage capitalism and empire, and see that it always ends up badly for everybody. They're not good ideas. They're not worth holding on to. I go to these people, these historians, these anthropologists, and see that a lot of the ways that we've been taught about what humans are was washed through whiteness, through empire, through colonialism, and through a view of human nature that was twisted at its foundation. And so a lot of what we know about humans is filtered through some very unhealthy ideologies and mindsets. And a lot of it is wrong. I like what David and David say about history. And one of the conventional narrative of human history is not only wrong, but quite needlessly dull. And if you remember history class, you will agree. So part of the off-ramp project is to bring in as much information for me from books and people and research and researchers and scientists and philosophers and sociologists and anthropologists to start asking the larger questions. We're at a crisis point. Seems like we're always at a crisis point, but we're at a crisis point here in the United States, certainly, and in many other countries that are falling backward into a fascist and authoritarianism and authoritarian views of my way or the highway, might is right. Just these are just ideas. They're not facts. They're just ideas, and we've seen how they play out. They're not worth the money they're printed on, right? Part of the off-ramp project is, where do we go next? We've seen how much trouble we can get ourselves into, right? We've seen how much trouble we can cause for each other. We've seen ourselves at our worst. What about our best? What would that look like? I think in times of chaos and crisis like this, this is when you can ask these questions because everything's falling apart. Yeah. And if you've been in situations like this in your own life, when you lose your job and your relationship goes to hell, and all of a sudden you lose, your rental gets sold out from under you, and your car also is a stinker, and nothing is going right. That's the time when you're free because nothing is holding you back. There's nothing, right? I don't know if you've had times like this. I have. But it's when you can say, who am I? What are my highest ideals? How do we move forward from here? What do I live for? What is important to me? Because all this other stuff fell away. A lot of stuff is falling away. A lot of our ideas and ideals and our belief in ourselves as Americans that we can do it. We're number one. Neither of these is true. And how do we get it back? Or how do we build anew? What does it look like? We each have a stake in this, and we each have a way to make things different in our tiny corner of the universe. And the Off Ramp Project is my tiny corner. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're trying to make it through this time. And I was thinking of that Saucy Minx Rousseau. Um, give yourself a break. You can't be an off ramp for everyone, but hopefully you can continue to be an off ramp for yourself. Surround yourself with dreamers and idealists and saucy minx philosophers and anthropologists who see things through a different lens, not people who want to maintain the status quo that has gotten us where we are. It's not a good status quo. And feel the deep feelings when, like me, you fail at being an off ramp and you have to say, I've now seen the edge of my ability to be an off ramp. I've seen it, I've been there. Um, and build from there. This is not a sprint, right? This is a long distance run that's going to be going on for years, if not decades. It's okay to fail at some parts of it and then get up and have some electrolytes and keep going. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trying to see things that maybe are not as visible as they need to be right now. Thanks for looking at A New History of Humanity with David Graeber and David Wengrow. And thank you. I'll see you next time.